Welcome to Snow Talk, where the Snow and Ice Management Association brings you trends, stories, news, and personalities that are shaping the professional snow and ice management industry. This season of Snow Talk is sponsored by Western, Fisher, and SnowX, so settle in and let's talk snow.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Snow Talk. My name's Evan Newman, Member Services Senior Manager with the Snow and Ice Management Association. I'm happy that you're joining us for another episode of Snow Talk. So our guest today is the visionary and driving force behind Skyline, Mr. Mark Arthofer. Mr. Hofer has built his company from the ground up. His passion is studying and educating others about the snow removal and salt industries, respectively. He is a certified snow professional, and Mark is currently serving in his final months as the immediate past chair of SIMA's board of directors and is involved with several groups of snow and salt professionals, including the American Public Works Association. Mark, thanks for joining us on today's episode of Snow Talk and spending some time with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to share. So I guess a little background on me. We started our snow business back in 2000. So we're going into our 25th season. I think we've kind of tried it all. A lot of wins and a lot of fails along the way, but learned a lot of things. The enjoyable part, I guess, and we always refer to our business as pre-SIMA, post-SIMA. So when we joined in SIMA back in 2012, what a learning experience and what a wonderful ride it's been to be involved with SIMA and such a great association. I'm pleased, obviously, as past chair right now, going off the board. 7 years of serving on the board. I've thoroughly enjoyed my time serving on the board, serving this association, and hopefully taking it in a better direction than it was when I first got on the board. Involvement with, and you said as far as the groups, being involved with American Public Works. I think that's a sector that the contractor side is not maybe necessarily tapped into. I think from an educational standpoint, both associations can benefit from one another. So I'm happy to say that currently I'm the liaison between the two. And that's been a fun endeavor over the last couple of years here, trying to build that. And really what kind of brought me to trying to push that forward was being in the salt industry. I work with both sides. I work with the contractor side. I work with the municipality side. And I see the overlap of education that needs to be done. And so does American Public Works, which is really, they've kind of welcomed this with open arms. So I'm excited to see where we can take that. And, I think it benefits everybody in the end, right? Like that's what we're trying to do is educate and move things forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you heard Mark say there, even though he's given 7 years of his time, we're keeping him involved as the liaison between the two organizations. So thanks for that continued involvement. And you mentioned education. I think that's a key piece of the relationship and a key piece of how we can continue to educate both sides of the aisle, if you will, the public works as well as the private sector, because we have a number of municipalities, universities, townships that come to us each year for the ASM or the CSP respectively. The ASM is a little more focused towards that world in terms of bridging both gaps and on the operation side. So I think that you're right. It's a key part about keeping that relationship open is making sure we have the same quality education in front of both entities in both sectors. So Mark, you're passionate about growing the industry. We know we've talked about this a number of times the last 2 years that I've been with SIMA and over the last year of your involvement as the chair. And you're also passionate about creating better relationships with the public sector. Why is that? And how do we start to do more of that as private contractors? How do we open up the door, if you will, to the public sector?
Well, I think part of that is I think there's a lot of misconceptions on both sides. Contractors think municipals have it all figured out, and municipals are thinking that contractors don't know anything because they look at our parking lots. And this is really what kind of initiated this. I was at an APWA show a couple of years ago in Pittsburgh in talking with municipality directors and stuff. I asked them what's one of their biggest concerns and pains. And they were concerned at the time, and I'm still concerned about legislative stuff that's coming down the pikes, right? Everybody's looking at chlorides in our water. What can we do to reduce chlorides? How do we manage and do a better job? And yet they're concerned about that being shoved down their throats, but yet they drive by, commercial parking lots and they're oversalted. And again, I think, the misunderstanding between the two, the municipal side didn't necessarily have a good grasp on the fact that from a liability standpoint, its contractor's only defense is the salt. Now, could we do a better job? Absolutely. Are we trying to educate and create opportunities so people aren't necessarily getting paid by the pound for salt so that, they're oversalting? And are we working as an association on legislative things? And absolutely, one of those was in Wisconsin last year, and we made it to the governor's desk with a bill to help limit liability for contractors, kind of mimicking the New Hampshire agreement. And it didn't make it because of some concerns that the governor had. But we're going to take another run at that this year. And I think hopefully we can kind of bring maybe the APWA in. They've offered their legislative branch to work with us and help us with that stuff. So I'm really hoping that we can kind of take that and push the bar and make that happen. So getting that understanding between both sides, why contractors do what they do and what municipalities are doing. And I think joining forces gives us the power to make those changes, right? And to get that educational piece in front of contractors and in front of municipalities, because we talk about membership for CIMA. Well, so does the APWA. They know that they're not servicing every municipality out there, the smaller municipalities that may not belong to the APWA or don't participate in the educational side of things. It's like, how do they get in front of them? No different than us. How do we get in front of more contractors to do a better job? So I think that's a very vital and important piece, is really how do we get in front of the entire populace that's in this industry to really try to focus on doing a better job. So that's what excites me about the interworkings of both associations and try to get everybody on the same page.
Sure. And for our audience who doesn't know much about that Wisconsin salt bill, not to put you on the spot here, but as you mentioned, it fell short due to some concerns from some different lobbies that were lobbying against it. But we're going to go back to the table with it. What would be a good way for someone in Wisconsin that's listening to this to get involved with that effort, or someone that's in another state, in your state, in Iowa, Idaho, wherever, that may want to do something like this in their own state? Because that's going to be our next big movement, I think, is finding ways to get this across the finish line in other states. Again, lower liability and safer waterways. It's a no-brainer. But tell us a little bit, if you don't mind, what that looks like before we jump into some of these questions here.
Honestly, there's power in numbers, right? So the more of us that do what we can do, reach out to your legislative, your representatives, state, federal, whatever, to, kind of push this along. It's like there's concerns. And if we don't do a better job, there's going to be serious ramifications down the road. They're already happening. So we really got to get a handle on this. And, what I always tell everybody, as far as salt usage goes, there's a good chance we're never going to use less salt because there's more and more pavement every day. But how do we kind of draw the line in the sand and say, okay, we're not going to use any more salt than we're currently using, and then we're going to do a better job of really try to figure out between, what's mechanical and chemical to try to do snow removal. So the best mechanical use we can possibly do, and then the best use of chemicals, and that's through using not only rock salt, but maybe treated salt, using brines, using hot mixes, coming up with the best program you can and the best storm plan. You can't go out in a parking lot, let's just say, and apply the same amount when you've got a 32-degree snowstorm versus a 20 below snowstorm, right? So you need to understand how and what to do and how to do that. And every storm is unique in its own way, but you got to have a very, very, very strong storm plan and be able to pivot and use different ideas and use different techniques to try to accomplish the same thing. Everybody wants better pavement this day and age. How do we get there, but not crucify the environment in the process of doing that? We all like to drink water. It's kind of a staple of our life, right? I don't think anybody's chugged any salt water lately and was happy about it, right? So if we want to keep our fresh water fresh, we need to work on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate some of those insights. I think that they're vital in terms of making sure that we get this across the aisle for folks in the industry as well as folks outside the industry. Again, as you mentioned, it's key to the health of our waterways. So getting into the meat of this conversation, the reason we put this podcast together, I reached out to you a few months ago because I get the question all the time about how people in our industry are wanting to land a DOT contract or develop a working relationship with their local municipality, or the big one, an airport is the one that comes up often. What are some of the reasons these are attractive contracts, and where do companies start to create some of those inroads with these, possible customers?
That's as simple and as complex a question all wrapped up in one.
That's the name of the game for me,
Yeah, that's right. So municipality contracts, whether it be airports would be like the home run, right? But coming with an airport, there are so many intricacies. There's just a lot to that, right? From getting checked out as far as, they want, try to go through the airport right now, right, to check in just to ride on a plane. Now you're going to go out and actually work on the runways. So, they're going to put you through some pretty grueling tests and documentation. Then to getting trained to be working in an airport, radio training and everything else they go through. It's pretty extensive. I've never actually had a snow contract on an airport, but I have done work on our local regional airport. And I was amazed at the amount of training I had to go through just to be able to do that. Governmental, when you're talking cities, counties, state, those are all bid process typically. Airports are not usually necessarily a bid. They go out with an RFP, right? And everybody has to bid on that. And airports are very particular in what they want. So they don't necessarily have to go low bid. Your typical city, state, county type stuff, when those are bid out, that's usually lowest qualified bid, right? So it's not always the lowest bid, but I'm going to say 90% of the time it is. But again, you got to go into that kind of knowing that it's low bid, and you have to decide where you want to be, right? Is it worth it? Most of the time, they're pretty lucrative contracts because they're willing to pay to get the job done. There's getting to be more and more of this with the workforce being challenged to try to come up with enough help. They're not immune to that, trying to attract good help to get it done. So a lot of places are opting to subcontract it out to contractors. Now, one of those things in a meeting last year at the APWA show is like, how do we know we're getting the right contractor? Again, comes back to the educational piece, right? And that's where SIMA is hopefully being able to help with that for next year. Hopefully we're able to present at the APWA show when we're going to present at the SIMA show. So, that's a goal that we've kind of set for this next year. But universities are typically kind of maybe the easier one to get into. And it depends again on the size of the university, but they don't necessarily it's not always a bid out process. It's really establishing a relationship with the managers, the facilities managers on that site. And if they're looking to subcontract out, I know for us, we're backup for two of the universities in Dubuque here. They have their own staff, but again, just like everybody else, they're challenged, right? So they can handle the smaller events. They can't necessarily handle the bigger events. And that's where we come into play with that. So you can kind of bake your own case, so to speak, right? Like, where do you fit in? How big a municipality you're talking about that you're trying to work with? Obviously, the larger the cities, the more complex those contracts are going to be. So, again, so I go back to it can be as simple or as complex as you want to get into, but they are lucrative contracts. There's no doubt about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's why people obviously ask me about them. They want to pursue them is because they can be lucrative. So obviously, there's a certain level of relationship building. It's also a certain level of bidding. And you mentioned the certifications, the security clearances needed at an airport, but sometimes that's needed at government facility as well. What certifications, security clearances would you, recommend proactively pursuing to make your company more competitive? Do you think that that's a good idea if someone's in consideration for a bid like this?
Yeah, because you're going to go even, and talking about university, we didn't even touch this one. Military bases, they sub a lot of their snow removal out. Local National Guard facilities, they all sub it out. They're not in the business to be plowing snow. So to have a certification, a CSP is huge. You can market that. ASM, if your operations people are ASM certified, right? They've gone through the training. You can show that because obviously if you have those two certifications, you're also going to be able to show that you have a training program, right? So again, low bid, but lowest qualified bid, right? So if you can go in with a storm plan, you can go in with all the backup certification, insurance documents, references, you got to go in. It's no different than applying for a job. You need to build your resume. And the stronger you can build that resume, the more kindly they're going to look on that. Now, that doesn't give you the opportunity to be twice the cost of the next guy, but it could solidify whether or not you get the contract. Because if it's a very tight race between you and your competitor for price, are you outranking them because you came into the offer prepared?
Investment's a big piece. It takes an investment to invest in these security clearances and certain certifications for these different contracts. But there's also an investment in equipment and de-icing products. I know that airports and different government facilities require some different, fairly specific de-icing techniques to be used. And frankly, I tell people whenever I talk to them, I say, hey, I'm not an expert, but what I have learned is that if you don't have the equipment, again, going back to this qualified piece, you're maybe a step behind. So what insights can you give on specific equipment and product needs that need to be taken into consideration when bidding on a job like this?
Well, and again, it all depends on what kind of contract you're going after. So if you're going after airport, are you doing just around the terminal areas? Because that's completely different plowing than if you're actually in the area where aircraft is, right? So, I mean, if you're in the area where aircraft, or maybe your smaller airport where you're doing runways and stuff, still the same protocol goes, right? You can't be out there using rock salt on a runway. It doesn't work. What are they going to be willing to let you use? Most of them that's spelled out very specifically in the contracts, because they've got to be very careful with what's being used on the runways, because whatever you use cannot react with the aluminum on the aircraft, right? So again, typically spelled out very much so. So brooms are a big thing on airports, snowblowers, large snowblowers, because you can't be leaving windrows along the side of the runway. They need that cleared out. It needs to be level. So again, to what extent, how big of an airport, small airport, large airport is going to make the difference in equipment, and what area are you doing? Military bases, municipalities, what have you, they're going to look at what do you offer for equipment, right? Maybe, and I've had this in my own experience, maybe a municipality wants you to do cul-de-sacs, because they've got plow trucks, and plow trucks are a challenge for cul-de-sacs. So maybe you can go in with the right equipment and actually be able to plow those out quicker and better for them. That's a contract in itself right there in residential areas. Having the correct salting equipment. Are you heavily vested in liquids, but yet your city's not? Maybe, and I have that in my own local area here, where the small cities don't have anything for liquid. So we've worked with them on treating their salt with our mobile mixer. And then we've helped them with the brine and stuff. So we go and actually apply brine for them and pre-treat their streets, if the storm warrants it. So again, if you have it and they don't, and you can educate it and you can prove to them that it's better for them, better for their, they're all about public safety. So if you can prove that to them, that's going to help them do a better job, and it's cost effective, then that's a win. You've just sold yourself, and that's really, we're all in this. We're all entrepreneurs. We're all about selling ourselves. So that's part of it. There may be times where it's not even a bid deal, because you're able to offer service that they want. It's not about the bid. It's about building that relationship. So some of it's bidding, some of it's relationships, some of it's just knowing the need and the niche that you can fit. So you got to carve that out for yourself. I mean, there isn't a single person that's probably listening to this podcast that isn't inquisitive and isn't able to think outside the box to make things happen.
Folks, we've come to the point in our podcast. We're going to take a quick pause to thank our sponsors at Western.
When it comes to ice control, tackle whatever winter throws your way with Western's all-new Marauder hopper spreaders. Your choice of material delivery systems lets you select the all-new Helix shaftless auger for precise rock salt application, or the Pinto chain conveyor that's perfect for thick, heavy de-icing materials. Engineered with riveted stainless steel construction and a streamlined design, they deliver optimized material flow for a smooth, consistent spread. For more information, visit your nearest Western dealer or westernplows.com.
Thanks to Western for being a part of Snow Talk's ongoing success. So, Mark, you were talking a little bit prior to the break that we are kind of going through this unique period in the sense of the investments around certifications, the investments in product, and we're talking about relationships and education. And one big piece that you mentioned that stood out to me is saying, okay, well, we can educate on brine use because maybe some of the smaller municipalities, townships, cities aren't capable of doing that. I think that that's a huge point. Actually, in the small municipality that I live in Ohio, the city manager tells me often, like, we'd love to use brine, but we don't have the capability. So I think that in those relationships, we should and could be able to educate people to the best of our abilities in that sales process. So I just wanted to mention that as we kind of put a bow on that topic and moved into this next piece about the contracts and bidding part of working with the public sector. So is that much different from the typical contract that you're putting together for a bank or shopping mall plaza or something like that? What's the differences around the contracting or the contract and bid language, if you will, for those people who have something that's kind of set up?
And again, it really is going to be determined by what exactly are you bidding on the municipal contract side. Are you doing airports? Are you doing universities? Are you doing military bases? Military bases have their own unique way of doing some things. They're not always necessarily looking for salt. They're not necessarily looking for bare pavement all the time. So it really having a good understanding of the level of service that's required will help you in the bidding process, right? And then you have to really take a look at it after you see that level of service that they're requiring, what their requirements are for equipment and stuff. will be a determining factor whether you want to make that investment to go after this contract or if it's just not a good fit for you, and sometimes that carrot on the end of the hook looks good until you get into it. So, take a deep dive into your own business and really understand where you want your business to go. And, is this a good fit for you, or is it, as my son always says, is it a want or is it a need? So do you want this or do you need this, or is it even a fit for you? And maybe your personnel, your employees, it's not something that they're in, so everybody needs to be on board if you're going to go after this, because it is a whole nother level of requirements and paperwork. And, there's just a lot to it. So again, having done some of them, I mean, they can be very lucrative and they can be a good guarantee. So it's having a good mix of contracts is really what I'm talking about. I guess.
Yeah. That diversification of contracts is definitely key across our industry. So what about common mistakes, common hiccups that come into play whenever trying to work with the public sector? What's a piece of feedback that you get whenever you go and work with folks at the APWA that say, okay, well, maybe this could have been explained to me a little bit better. Maybe there was this mistake or hiccup in that process.
So that kind of almost goes back to what I just said a little bit ago on both sides, right? The municipality knows what they want. Sometimes they don't necessarily know how to get there. And it's the same way for the contractor. They know what they want, but they don't necessarily know how they're going to get there. So to navigate that, you really have to make sure that you're on the same page with one another, right? So that's kind of where the relationship comes into play. You need to build that relationship with the public works director or the street superintendents or the commander on a military base. You need to have those contacts and understand what's their end goal and what are they really trying to strive for, because the municipality side, all eyes are on them, right? So the public is watching what the municipality is doing. And are they doing it correct? And they're not, people are not afraid to pick up the phone and say, hey, our street's slick. How come that is? Because you plowed so-and-so's street, right? It's no different than your parking lot people calling you and say, hey, I see so-and-so's parking lot is clean, but yet you haven't touched ours. Why is that? And then you're always explaining yourself. So they're in the same thing, just different eyes, right? Some same, some different. But just knowing that you fit, does the glove fit or doesn't it fit kind of thing.
Right. And understanding that some of those challenges that you may, as you mentioned, with parking lots versus streets and sidewalks, there's going to be some of those same complaints regardless of who your customer base is.
Absolutely. And, and really what you want to identify is if you're trying to bid a municipal contract, it's like, one, not only understanding what they want out of it and where they want to go with it, but what is their challenge, right? What is the challenge that is facing them that they're not able to accomplish? And can you fix that challenge for them, right? So, spinning back to the brine, we'd really love to do brine, but we don't want to spend the money on a brine maker and spraying equipment because we don't know if it's going to work for us. Well, maybe you have a briner, maybe you have a spray. Can we do some sample streets? Can we try this for you? Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. How's that fit in, right? Don't be afraid to go out there and do a test run, do a side-by-side with them, just kind of see what's it look like and what can it do. Building that relationship again, that's what it's all about. If you're good at it and you can do a great job for them and they don't have it, believe me, they want it. They just don't know how to get there.
Right. Or their city budget doesn't have the capability to say, hey, we're going to take on brine, but maybe they have the budget to hire somebody to take on brine. There's a little bit.
It's always funny, and you can spin that one, Newman, on that as far as it doesn't necessarily fit their budget. But can you prove to them and show them that you can save them money? So in the end, what they thought was going to be more costly actually drove money into the bottom of their budget. So they still have money to be able to do things. So again, it's really about, like, if they're using straight white salt and they're not using brine, could you come in there and help them maybe with treated salt? Or can you come in there and help them with brine or enhanced brine to get through a storm, or show them that cold driving temperatures that they're using way more salt than they need to be using if they did some of this other stuff, right? They don't have all the answers, nor do we have all the answers, because nobody has all the answers, right? Person, I wish I did, because then I'd own my own island someplace. But I don't, right? So I'm still working stuff every day, trying to figure out and solve problems. The fun part about it, and this is what I find rewarding, and I think people that would dive into doing this, is coming to a common ground, working with these people. That's the fun part, and building that relationship and solving problems and fixing problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good segue into one of our final questions, into this next question. Future trends in the public-private partnership arena. You mentioned earlier, Mark, there's a labor shortage across the industry on the public and private side, but specifically on the public side, it's harder and harder for these municipalities to garner attention and get somebody to maybe to do streets and sidewalks for them or get a crew. So there's an open door for future trends. And so kind of leading the way that there's that. But what other trends are you seeing for private contractors to get involved with some of these public contracts to really, again, open up and diversify their business?
Everybody, both sides of this, nationwide, everything we do, everybody's trying to figure out how to do more with less, right? And so I think, again, you got to identify what is their pain point and can you help solve that pain point? That's in our own businesses. We look to do that. If you're working with municipalities, they're looking to try to do that. So again, trying to find that common ground and what you can do. I mean, there's so many different tactics. There's so many different ways of doing things. Coming to the symposium, learning all you can. I welcome everybody. If you're close to the APWA show next year, come to it. I mean, their educational platform is just like Simon's. It's awesome. It's fun listening to these guys. And it's interesting how the speakers at their show, just like at our show, I mean, it's the guys that aren't afraid to make a mistake. They want to move things forward, right? So it's fun to see the people that are progressive and the guys that are humble enough to say, hey, listen, we did this, but it didn't work. It failed miserably. Then we pivoted and we did this instead. I like to always use the one and the guys from West Des Moines, one of the fastest growing cities in the United States right now. They only have X amount of budget, but they're trying to figure out how do they really ramp up their brine program and try to lower salt usage. So they go out and plow and they have their plow trucks lay down just a little bit of granular and then they're following it with a 3-lane boom truck for spraying brine and they're hammering it down and they call that system their shake and bake system, right? So they have literally cut their salt usage in half. I mean, it's awesome. I got to be good friends with their public works director. He has since gotten very smart and he's moved to Arizona so he doesn't have to deal with snow where he's at anymore. But he was a very smart guy and his team was absolutely phenomenal. And that's the fun part about working with all these different agencies is you can take what they're doing right and help bring that back to your own operation. I mean, there's just so much stuff. If you're willing to learn and not have closed mind, the sky's the limit, right? Don't ever be nervous about working with a municipality because they do the same thing you do, just a different day, different way. But at the end of the day, everybody's working on public safety. They want it just as much as we do. So again, make it a partnership. I think that's essential. The system's there to be used. I think having municipality contracts along with seasonals and per push and time and material, having a very mixed portfolio kind of helps you weather the storm. I mean, take last winter, right? Across the country, but we didn't have a winter. So having that mix of contracts just keeps you in business. And so be smart. Don't make promises you can't keep. And good luck.
Thanks for listening to Snow Talk, sponsored by Western, Fisher, and SnowX. Check out all of our episodes at sima.org/podcast.